Hey everyone, this is Jason Venable, aka Tenerd of tenerd.com. So just want to walk through my new multi-file uploader for Salesforce.com. The code, it's kind of using some new technologies, HTML5, a lot of JavaScript. Just want to walk through it, kind of get a good understanding so that if you do end up forking this or using it, you kind of have a starting point. So let's just do a quick demo. This is a Visualforce page with a simple component on it that simply has one attribute in it, the parent ID of the object that will accept attachments. So I can just hit the choose file button, and then I can select my pictures here, hit the open, and I've selected multiple files, and now I can just hit the upload button and the uploads will begin. Some things to note: you can see the status bar progressing as the upload completes, but also it shows the size of the file and percent complete. It shows the name of the file, and then when it completes, the name actually becomes clickable to open the file you just uploaded or just maybe view the image. In this case, just images. So I can pull up the zombie wife picture. Yep, my wife is a zombie. It's a fact. There she is. But there's also some other stuff too, stained glass, if maybe that was a little too scary for you. So that's it, basically a really simple overview of how the tool works. Now we're going to jump into the code to see how it really works. Okay, so I've got about 200 lines of JavaScript here. I don't know how this walkthrough is going to work, but we'll do the best we can. So at the top, we just have a couple event listeners for jQuery. Basically, on the page, when you select the upload button or maybe the clear button, that's what these event listeners here on this part are for. Then after that, those basically kick off functions within this file. So we've got some basic variables here. Nothing really important. The most important one is this chunk size. So basically we split files up and we send them to Salesforce in chunks. I mentioned this in the blog post, but this just needs to be divisible by 3. If not, you get all sorts of data corruption. Just has to do with the way base 64 encoding works. So if we scroll back up to the top, you can see when someone clicks the upload button, it calls a function called prepare file uploads. So we jump down to the very first one here. So the first thing we're going to do is actually get these file objects from the input field. So this is using a new kind of a feature of the latest and greatest technology that browsers can do. So we'll get the files, basically puts them in an array. So if there are no files selected, the length of that is 0. It's going to, say please select a file. Next thing we want to do is we want to disable all the inputs. So disable the upload button, disable the browse button. Right now there's no functionality for like selecting multiple files at a time. It's basically select them, upload them, select them, upload them. So we disable all the inputs while those uploads are occurring. Next, what we do is actually build out some HTML on the page. So when we did that upload, you could see that these upload bars were all constructed on the page. We do that in the JavaScript based on the number of files selected from the input. So this for loop here will actually just loop through the file length, and for each one of these it'll calculate the size of the file and then create a div which basically has the status bars and some other information about the file that we are uploading. Some important things to note are some custom attributes called data status pending. So they start out pending, but as we complete the uploads, we'll actually change the status to complete. What else we got on here? That's probably the most important thing in this section here. So after we construct the HTML for all the files, we basically just add it to the page. And then we start a function called check for uploads, which actually really starts the upload process. So the very first thing we do in the check for uploads message is loop through those divs we created representing the files to upload and actually find the first one that has the status of pending. So in that case, it would be the very first element on the page that has the upload class. So if the upload length does not equal 0, that means, if the upload variable does not equal 0, it means we have something to upload. Otherwise, basically this if doesn't happen, and down at the bottom, there's an else right here. This is all uploads complete. And then basically what this does, it just re-enables the buttons, and it also replaces the input field on the page. So if I look at this page real quick, in this it doesn't show it because it's Chrome, but if you have something like Firefox or an Explorer, you'll have that input field with like the path of the file. Well, after you've uploaded something, you don't really need to keep that path variable in the field. So you basically just get rid of the input field and put a new one on the page is kind of how it wipes it out. And so that's what this line down here is doing. Basically finds a file on the or component on the page and replaces it with another input field. Basically the exact same thing, but it wipes out the selection. So it kind of prevents duplicate uploads, things like that. So going back up to the main part of this method here, if there is a file to upload, we basically grab that file from an array, the files array, which when we read the files up here in the prepare files upload, we got the files, put them in an array. So this array is going to be used throughout the whole process of uploading. So we get the very first one based on the index of the element we're uploading. So one other thing I didn't point out is that on these custom div fields, there's another attribute called data index, basically 0, 1, 2. Direct correlation to the files that we stored in the array. So we can get the file in the 0 position, the file in the 1 position, the file in the 2 position for those instances in which we select multiple files at the same time. So based on whatever file we're currently uploading, we'll grab that out of the array. And then we'll create this byte chunk index array, which I'll try to explain, might be a little complicated. But basically we need to somehow determine the byte ranges of how we're going to split this file up and send it to Salesforce.com. So very top of the page we declared that byte chunk size. This is kind of where we're going to use that. So if let's say we have a 1 megabyte file, we want to split it up into chunks of 180 bytes and send that to Salesforce.com. And so basically it just constructs a string array here with some numbers in it indicating the chunks that need to go to Salesforce. So 0 to 17999. Then the next chunk would be byte 180,000 to whatever, and so on and so on. Whereas the last chunk of the upload may only be, 30 bytes. And so that's kind of how this is built out, and we'll get into that more later. The first thing we're going to do is check the size of the file. If the file right here, the file size, is less than or equal to the chunk size we're going to be sending this up to Salesforce, we can send all the file in one go. So our chunk size index basically goes from 0 to whatever the size of the file is. So if the file we're uploading is larger than our chunk size, we need to break this up into pieces. First thing we have to do is figure out how many full chunks we're going to send to Salesforce. We just basically divide the size of the file by our chunk size, and size in bytes is what this is, current file size, and we get the number of full chunks to send to Salesforce. Then we just have to figure out what the remainder is, what's left over, and that would be our remainder bytes. So we just do some mod function here to get the remainder. And then we are going to build that string array, kind of like this up here, representing the byte chunks that have to be sent to Salesforce.com. Looping through here, that's what that does. Not really going to explain it, but if you have any questions, let me know. I've already butchered this video 50 times trying to explain exactly what it does. So once we've built out the array representing the byte chunks that need to be sent to Salesforce, we'll actually start to process these individual chunks with a method called process byte chunk index. This is a bad name. I'll probably rename it by the time you actually see this code. But what it does is it's actually going to look at the byte ranges that we've designated for the file to upload and send those to Salesforce.com. So you can see the first time it's called, it passes in blank, which basically means it's going to be attached to nothing in Salesforce because we're sending individual pieces of the file. So on the second, third, fourth, fifth piece, we need to know what attachment record in Salesforce to attach it to. In this case, we have nothing because it's the first one we're doing, so it's blank. But you can see the method starts right here, process byte chunk index. So you can see it has an argument here, attachment ID. So if the byte chunk index array is a length greater than 0, it means we have something to upload to Salesforce.com. And so what this does here is it basically splits out that string array into a start byte and an end byte. And this is how we're going to split up our file. So based on whichever web browser we're using here, Safari, or Safari doesn't work actually, Chrome, Firefox, we'll split the file and get a blob representation of the byte range with the start and the stop. Next, we just instantiate a reader object, which is something new in a lot of the browsers, an HTML5 feature. And then based on that, we say reader read as binary string the piece of the file that we've already chopped up, the blob chunk. And when that finishes, it will actually call this message here. So reader on load is fired when this read as binary string method completes. It's not exactly obvious here, but it's just something that happens automatically when you call this read as binary string method. So once that happens, the first thing you do is make sure the read was successful with this line here. And sometimes the read may have an error. I don't really know why. I've never had it error out, but it can. And then the next thing we have to do is, based on that binary string that we read, we need to actually take the binary string and encode it to base 64. And so when we transmit stuff to Salesforce using JavaScript remoting, it has to be in base 64. We do that here with this function here. Next, we actually call the method in the controller. File upload controller is the name of our Apex class, and the method is attach blob, and it passes in a lot of arguments here. The parent ID, what it should be attached to, the attachment ID, the record that we're actually going to incrementally attach these binary blob objects to, and then some other things when it creates it the first time, like the file name, the file type, the base 64 value of the piece of the file we're sending to Salesforce, and then a callback here for when the upload completes. So at that point, it's sent the stuff to Salesforce.com, and listening in the Apex controller here is the attach blob method, which listens for all those arguments and basically does some really simple stuff to create an attachment in Salesforce.com or add on that blob to an already existing attachment in Salesforce.com. So the attachment ID the first time was blank, so in this case it just creates a new attachment record in Salesforce.com, setting the name, the content type to all the stuff that was passed in from the page, and then it basically returns the ID of the attachment. Now this is important because when we return it, we want to make sure we designate that again, that when we send files back or pieces of the file back to this controller again, we add those incremental blob or byte chunks to the right file. If the attachment ID is defined right here, we'll actually query the ID and the body from the Salesforce attachment object, and then in this one line we'll basically doing some base 64 encoding, decoding, combining everything back together, converting it to a blob. We update the attachment. We do that a bunch of different times with a bunch of small pieces of the file. In the end, we end up with a full and complete file in Salesforce.com. And then again, we return the attachment ID just to let the page know that everything's done. And it will actually update that little URL so you can click on it and go right to the document in Salesforce.com. So coming back to the JavaScript now, on the callback for the JavaScript remoting complete, we have an inline function here. So if it was successful, we basically update some of the percents complete on the page. Because we split the file up into like byte chunks, we know the index of the last byte sent to Salesforce. So if we know the last byte, we know the size of the file, we can calculate the percent complete. That's what this does here. It updates the percent complete, which has the little percent symbol telling you, but it also updates the width of the progress bar as it scoots across the page. And then basically in that byte chunk index array, we remove the very first element in that array, which is representing the byte chunk that we just uploaded to Salesforce.com. And then finally, we call the process byte chunk index array again, which will run through all of this all over and upload the next byte chunk, which is now at the index 0 position in that array because we just removed the value of the indexes we just uploaded. There's a lot going on here. A lot of confusing talk. I know I'm probably butchering a bunch of words and saying the wrong things, but hopefully it's helping a little bit. And let me know if you have any questions so I can totally clarify and make it a lot more simple. So on the callback function, if something did fail, we will actually upload some stuff on the page. We'll say it completed, but there was an error, some custom CSS, make it red, something didn't work right. And then we'll call the check for uploads method, which if we scroll to the top, we'll actually try to find the next div on the page which has the status as pending, and redo that whole process over again. So how does it know when a file has been complete? So we created this index array of byte chunks to upload. Eventually we're trimming off the first index of the array as we do an upload. It will come to nothing. There will be nothing left in it. So if you look in the process byte chunk index, the first thing it does is if the index contains something in it greater than 0, it will do the upload, split the file, send it off to Salesforce. But if there's nothing left, it means everything in that array has been already sent to Salesforce.com, and this else method is, or this else block is called, which basically updates the status attribute to complete, fixes the name element on the page to point to the actual attachment in Salesforce.com, and then this also calls the check for uploads method, which then looks for the next element on the page that has the status pending and uploads that file. So this is it. That was long. I probably messed up a lot of things. Maybe I made it more confusing. Hopefully I didn't. Hopefully it gives you an idea of at least the process of how this works. Get into the code, kind of poke around, you'll probably get a better understanding. But thanks for watching. If you have any questions, definitely ask. I will be all over this. If you have ideas for improvements, let me know as well. And hopefully we can make this a really, really great app for lots of people to use. Thanks.